Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In tonight's episode, let's explore a physical piece of history that evokes gratitude and solemn remembrance in the hearts of American patriots. This is the final resting place for the thousands of American soldiers who gave their lives during the Battle of Gettysburg, the battle that turned the tide of the American Civil War. After Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, this is perhaps the most recognizable military graveyard in the Western Hemisphere. Let's explore the story of Gettysburg National Cemetery. To understand the nature of this solemn place, we need to understand the conflict that first caused it to be created. The Battle of Gettysburg is one of the most iconic battles in world history. From July 1st to July 3rd of 1863, the Union Army and the Confederate Army met at the little hamlet of Gettysburg in southern Pennsylvania and nearly annihilated each other. The 3 days of brutal fighting saw over 50,000 casualties on both sides and roughly 10,000 dead. In the end, the Union Army under General George Meade drove back the Confederates under General Robert E. Lee, and this Union victory proved to be the turning point in the Civil War. Sure enough, the Union would go on to win the war less than 2 years later. Gettysburg, the formerly peaceful farm town near the root of the Appalachian Mountains, was overwhelmed by the amount of dead soldiers in the days following the battle. Residents of Gettysburg were left with the unpleasant and harrowing task of giving a proper burial to the men who laid down their lives as the bodies of those men began to decompose. Finally, with timely financial assistance from the state of Pennsylvania, a proper burial site was found. The land chosen was a hill just south of the center of town, where on the final day of the Battle of Gettysburg, the Union Army ferociously drove back a fierce rebel charge under General George Pickett. In October of 1863, while the war still raged on, the fallen Union soldiers at Gettysburg were honored with a proper reburial at the Gettysburg National Cemetery. Roughly 3,500 Union soldiers from the battle were laid to rest on the hill where many of those same had defended their country back in July. Those who had fallen on the Confederate side were denied burial at Gettysburg, but many were eventually reburied properly in southern states after the war. The dedication of the National Cemetery took place on November 19, 1863. On that fateful day, President Abraham Lincoln spoke some of the most profound words ever uttered in American history in a span of 2 minutes in what would become known as the Gettysburg Address. Lincoln made a promise in that speech that in the sovereignty of God would ring true, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. And sure enough, it did. Today, Gettysburg National Cemetery holds the bodies of more than 6,000 American veterans, not just from the Civil War, but also from the Spanish-American War, the First and Second World Wars, Korea, and Vietnam. Thanks so much for joining me once again for A Moment in History.